Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation. I am so excited for this one. We get to have another friend, a good, amazing coach, and someone that we're going to learn a lot from today, no doubt. I'm Phil Dark, your host, and with me is my brother, Paul Jobson. Paul, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Phil. We are pushing through the beginning of school and excited about all things that come with that, sport related and Warrior Way ramping up and all those awesome things. But super excited about our guest today as well and what we're going to learn from him. But before that, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It was interesting. Yesterday, I came home from working yesterday, and Becca, my wife Becca, had a text chain out, and my son had started using her phone with some of his teammates, and it was a great lesson for my son about the dangers of texting, and the fact that especially in a group chain when people are going back and forth and everyone's going, the timing of it could be really bad as far as you saying something, and it could appear to be responding to something when it was actually responding to something earlier. He's 12, so it's my youngest, and he doesn't have a phone. So good thing it was on my wife's phone as well. But basically, what happened was one of his friends who's not on his team was part of the chain for some reason with his teammates. He's talking trash. And he said at one point, well, guys, it's not like Justin doesn't carry your team, right? And Justin was responding to something earlier about how his buddy played on two different teams. And he said, it's true, broskies, or something like that. And it appeared he was saying that he carried the team, and he was in tears. He's like, that's not what I was meant. That's not what I was responding to. And he's like, I don't want them to think that I need them. I like, obviously I don't. But it was a very cheap lesson for him, and so we taught him how to handle it. And he went and talked with it. He texted his coach first and said, hey, coach, just so you know, this is what happened, and I just want you to know what actually happened. And then he went and talked with each of his teammates about it at the practice. And I said, you as a captain could also use this as a bigger lesson, and talk to the whole team about it and how this happened, and just so they know. And so he went to practice. He didn't talk to the whole team, but he talked to each of the guys, and he said, I didn't want to bring it out to the whole team. I didn't want to make it a big deal if it wasn't yet. So, but it was really good, because we talked about that, that tech off-season talk that we had, and I thought it was just a good thing to relay to everybody else too. It's just it happens, right? So that's good reason to be monitoring what our younger kids especially are talking about on texting, but just how do we deal with those lessons? Not that any of us have ever dealt with that as coaches on teams with misunderstandings on text, but yeah, I know we talked about one of them, Paul. So
Yeah.
anyway, so that was a really cool thing yesterday that I thought was timely in our conversations that we've had here. So anyway, but yeah, so that's good, and just got back from Nashville with my kiddos, with two of my girls, and it was awesome. Just a great trip to be able to spend some time with them. So, how's the Jobson home with Marcy back in the saddle and everything good? Back to normal? School?
Things are back to normal. Kids are done crying all day long because dad's running the house. Things
Yep.
are better. So, but I will say one of the greatest features Apple has added to the phone is the reply to text. Like you can select a certain text and reply
Oh
to it.
yes.
That's been a great feature for me because I've been caught in that loop
Yeah.
before in our large family dynamics. Large text, but yeah, things here are great. Almost back to normal. School, sports, all things almost normal. So things are running along pretty good. So I'm excited to hear later about your Nashville trip as well. So we'll get to that
Yeah.
maybe offline.
Offline, I mean, we could have an entire episode about it, but it probably wouldn't get too many downloads. So we're not going to
Yeah,
do that.
we got to get to our guest today. We
Our
teased very early that we got this
exactly,
great guest. It's going to be an awesome
exactly.
show, and we talked for like 3 minutes, and
I
we
know,
may not
I
get to him.
know.
I don't know.
I think we will. I think we will. We
Okay.
do. We have Patrick Gilliam. He's the Wheaton women's soccer coach. He's become a good friend through a lot of different things we're doing together, and I'm just excited to be able to have this conversation, get deep into who he is, and to be able to understand what he can teach us and what he has learned in his career. So, Patrick, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's kind of that crazy time of year when the fall season really gets going. We've had at the Division III level, we get a really short training camp experience, but had that about a week and a half ago, and classes began last Wednesday, and then scrimmage. We scrimmaged at a preseason. We actually had 2 scheduled, and don't know if you caught wind of. We had about a 100-degree day here last Wednesday, and it was 125 on our turf, and so the scrimmage last Wednesday did get canceled, but we scrimmaged on Saturday, second opponent, and we get going with opening tournament here on campus this Friday and Saturday. So really diving
it happens
into
quick,
pretty quickly.
Yeah. And by the way, Texas, we just kind of sent Texas to the Midwest for a few minutes because we needed some relief. So you're welcome for that, but I think it's all come back now. So
I think it gave me some empathy I had heard about it all summer long, and I was like, what is it really like when it's that warm? And
be careful what you ask,
Well, my wife and I have agreed. I have a car that's 13 years old. We're like, we're just going to drive it. It's a Honda. I can drive it forever. And it has no air conditioning, which most of the time in Chicago you can get away with. And every summer I'm like, it's time for a new car. And then it gets to August and September, and I'm like, I made it through another summer. It has heat. I can handle it. But boy, I went out last Wednesday. I was like, okay, this is not a day to have no air conditioning. So.
Yeah, going back to Nashville, my kids, California kids, tried and true, get off the plane, and it was midnight, and the humidity was at 82%. And my daughter looks at me and she goes, I could never live here, within 2 minutes of walking out of the airport. So that was something that definitely experienced for them. Then it was 106 on the heat index. They also learned what the heat index is. And that was another thing. So anyway, what are the things we talk about here, Patrick? And, we'll get into the Division III stuff here in a minute, too, because I think that's really interesting that a lot of people probably don't even know or understand what that looks like. But I just want to hear your story. Most people listening probably don't know who you are, haven't had the experience to get to know you. So just share your story, how you developed your passion for soccer, for leadership, and how you ended up coaching at Wheaton College.
Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and an area that was very soccer rich, and started playing as very young, played baseball and soccer primarily, and played up through high school. And then when it came time for college, actually my last few years of high school, I just kind of fell away from athletics and an athletic focus and away from that friend group, which can sometimes lead you the wrong way, but a lot of times being a part of a team and having friends in an athletic arena can actually be a really healthy and helpful thing. I kind of fell in with a group that wasn't so healthy. And but some of my friends who were a couple years older were beginning to play college soccer, and they were telling me about their experiences and just how much from the higher level of play to the travel to just representing your school. And I was like, that sounds like something I'd love to do, but I've kind of allowed my game to get rusty. I've allowed, I've just kind of dove into more a group of friends who were just more interested in partying and things like that, and didn't know the Lord at all. And so I just was like, I'm going to have to sell myself a little bit here. I don't have people beating down my door to recruit me, even though, I've been playing my whole life. And so I just started reaching out to colleges, and the college that by far showed the most interest was a small liberal arts Christian college in Chicago, Judson College at the time. It's now Judson University. And the coach, I just remember, it was just such a different level of interest and then personal attention. Went up, did a visit, really enjoyed it. Again, I grew up in a Catholic home. So I was going to church every Sunday, but I didn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so for me, I heard Christian college. I was like, I got this. This is something I'm familiar with and comfortable with. But I remember on my visit just being like, man, what a great group of guys. And the community on the team just seemed really kind of unique and special. And they made me feel welcome. And so I chose to attend Judson, and went there and probably had a career, which I think now as a coach was very beneficial. My first year, I saw very limited time. I traveled to every game, but wasn't a guy getting a lot of minutes. I think part of it was the short period of time I had taken away from the game. I just had to sharpen in so many ways. And then, but I was very teachable. I was hungry to learn. I think I was a hard worker. And so by my sophomore year, I was starting to get a lot of minutes. My junior year, pretty much hardly came off the field. My senior year, we had the best team in my 4 years there, and started and about halfway through the season, lost my job to a freshman, and won it back. And then later in the season, tore my ACL, and my career ended prematurely. And so my college career kind of had such a wide variety of experiences that I think now looking back, hindsight's 2020, I think they've benefited me greatly as a coach, because I can kind of walk in the shoes and empathize pretty much with all my players, no matter what their role is. What I didn't mention in there is that halfway through my sophomore year, I did come to know Jesus personally as my Savior, and proverbial fork in the road moment changed my life drastically, changed the course of so many things in my life, and even how I approach soccer. And so it was around that time that I really knew, because of the impact this soccer program had had on my life, I was like, I think, man, what an amazing calling to be able to keep doing something I love, stay involved with the game, but create a community and a culture that actually is holistic, and it's having life impact on young men or young women, and coaching the person as much as the player, because my college coach definitely did that. And so I decided to major in physical education. I decided I wanted to be a coach. And right after graduation from Judson, I got a job as an English teacher and high school boys and girls coach at a small Christian high school, not too far from here, from Wheaton, and coached and taught 5 years at that Christian high school. And then actually some of my players and students, so some were not even kids who played for me. They were playing basketball collegiately at Trinity International University. The position became open for both a men's and a women's coach there. And they had kind of given my name, and long and short, I ended up at Trinity International as I did a lot of things at TIU. I was the men's coach for 15 total seasons when you add them up. I was the women's coach for 26 seasons. I was the athletic director for 8 years. I coached baseball, a little baseball, basketball, softball along the way. I was a sports information director, did a lot in my time at Trinity, and was kind of getting to a point in the last few years at Trinity. I wasn't upset there. I wasn't disenchanted. I still felt very called to coaching, but it was kind of like, what's the next step? I just felt the Lord kind of being like, what's the next step? Have you done everything you're supposed to do here? And if not this, what else? Is it ministry? Very passionate about sports ministry. I'm very passionate about coaching coaches, and young coaches in particular, and really helping develop young women coaches. I think our game lacks a lot of female presence in head coaching positions, and so wanting to help that. And around that time, the position here at Wheaton became open. And I had a couple close friends that had connections to Trinity and Wheaton say, we think you should apply for this job. And I've said this to some people, Phil and Paul, I think this is great. Anytime you're applying for a job that you quote unquote don't have to have, it's the greatest thing in the world. I was not upset at Trinity. I wasn't like, I got to get out of here and this is just the end. And I was very happy where I was and very settled. But kind of wondering, Lord, is there something else? And so in the interview process, it was just easy. I was like, it's not going to be any good for Wheaton if I try to be something I'm not. It's not going to be any good for me. Just be who you are. And if that's what they need at this present time in their program's evolution, it's a good fit. And likely they'll hire you. And if it's not, that's better for everybody too. And in December of 2022, I was hired as the coach here, began in January, or December of 21, excuse me, began in January of 22. And so I'm about 18 months into my time here at Wheaton, beginning my second season, not quite 2 years total on the job.
Yeah, that lesson right there is massive. And I talk to people all the time when they say, "How do you interview?" And I said, "Just be yourself. Just be who you are. Because if you try to answer how you think they want you to, then they're going to hire somebody else. Not meaning
Right.
they'll hire a different person. They'll hire not you. You're going to hire the person that was in that interview that was answering differently than who you are. And that's not what anyone wants. And if it's a fit with who you are, and you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, right? I mean, that's something people forget too, is it got to be a fit both ways. And usually when it's a fit one way, it's a fit the other way. So I'm glad you kind of hit that, that side note there. That was, I think, very, very good there. So, yeah, I love all those little twists and turns and just coaching a million different things. I love that story. It sounds like it's just like, hey, whatever we need at any given time. That's ministry right there. I mean, that's a great, if you ever, going into sorcery, I remember the first mission trip I went on, I played volleyball, baseball, soccer. It was a soccer trip, but they needed players on all these teams. So let's just do whatever. Sure. I was on the music team. I sang, I did the drama, whatever they need, let's do it. So I love that. So Patrick, what, with all of that and what you're doing, I mean, we've talked to it's weaving in and out of this story, what's that personal life purpose, your why, that you have, and how are you living that out?
Yeah. I would say for me, and this would be your question was definitely about my personal life purpose, but I feel like what I would say is our program's purpose very much intertwines with my personal life purpose. And a few years ago, I really thought about this, and I had a mentor talk to me about purpose and objective. Probably somewhere along the line, I'll use the phrase like both and. I want a both and program. I think kids have to settle many times at the college level for either or, like amazing team community, and we just don't take the soccer very seriously. Or, man, I'm learning, my soccer IQ is growing, the practice and training sessions are phenomenal, everything's tight in regard to how we approach the game, but it's a toxic environment, and there's cancerous personalities, and there's drama everywhere. And so either or, I think so many kids have to settle for one or the other. Both and is what I wanted, but I'm so thankful for good coaching mentors who just challenge you to say, this coaching mentor said, what if you had to choose one? And like any pig-headed coach, I was like, no, I want both. And they're like, what if you had to choose one? And what he was trying to drive me to was the idea that it can't just be kind of like, there has to be something that's bigger than soccer, because what if soccer is taken away? And what if soccer, and the way he got me was it was right around COVID. He said, so you were a college soccer coach during COVID, but there was no game. And if it's only about the X's and O's, what were you going to do? There was nothing left. But, and in a second, I'll share my purpose. And when I think about where he got me to land, is my purpose could be done during a pandemic because it was bigger than the game. And where he also got me is he said, if you stand in front of your team and you talk about your program's purpose and your purpose being all on field related, what about the girl who just tore her ACL? She's standing there going, I'm not going to play for 9 months, and I can't even contribute to the program achieving its purpose. And then he said, what about the girl? This is even tougher. She's not even injured, but she just can't get on the field. She's just where she's at on the depth chart right now. She's not getting a lot of minutes. She begins to wonder, does it even matter if I show up? Because the program's purpose is all on field related, and I'm not contributing on the field. And so for me, Phil, I went with the Great Commission and the Great Commandments. I was like, I'm not a deep theologian. I love scripture, passionate about it, but I'm like, I'm not seminary trained or anything like that. But I was like, these things were called the Great Commission and the Great Commandments. They must be really, really important. And to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, strength, to love our neighbor as ourselves, and then to go and make disciples. So I would say that the purpose of my life is to use soccer to bring glory to God through living out the Great Commandments and the Great Commission. And the way we sum it up for our players is we say love, discipleship, multiplication. Um, Love for God, love for neighbor, discipleship, life on life, sharpening of each other, helping us grow through the sanctification process, and then multiplication. Um, I had a mentor, a guy named Scotty Kessler, who just talked about uh, when you coach, the exponential multiplication of the kingdom is crazy. Like he's like, you literally as one human being can affect hundreds of thousands of people. And it's just, I mean, he has this chart that's just fascinating. And it's like in a 30-year career, you could touch the lives of hundreds of thousands of people indirectly by just being a Division III college soccer coach. That's amazing to me. So that would be my purpose, I think. And I think we would say it's our program's purpose, hopefully.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's right there at the end, even you said it's my purpose. And I hope that it's, the program's purpose, and that, as coaches, our programs usually reflect who we are. And as we know in leadership, you need to know who you are first, right? Before you got to lead yourself, before you can lead others. And I just love how you've approached that. So, I'm excited and encouraged by what you're saying there. Patrick, tell us a little bit. Division III soccer, Division III sports present some interesting things that are different. There's some advantages, maybe some disadvantages. Take us kind of through the pros and cons of coaching at the Division III level.
Yeah, I would say I'll start with this. Is I'm still so new here that I'm when I thought about this question, I thought there's going to be somebody who's a lifer at the Division III level who's going to say, "Boy, he butchered that one." It's like here's what I'd say about it. Like, I do think what allows me to answer your question, Paul, a little bit maybe more interestingly is I'm coming from a level of NAIA, which probably resembles more Division II and Division I. And maybe even, right, some would say there's even less boundaries there, but overall I felt like there were boundaries, but they were the drastic difference, I think, between NAI and D3 has it gives me in some ways a chance to answer this question well, and in some ways I'm still new and naive to it. So one thing I think is it's an incredibly student-friendly environment. When we talk about student athletes, we call them that, but the Division III focus is definitely on the student athlete. A lot of the compliance rules and the different standards and and kind of boundaries that are in place are put there to preserve the academic experience for the student. And it's just kind of first and foremost one of the biggest things. Well, that fits. Even though I was coaching at an NAI institution, the student aspect of their student athlete lives outside of the spiritual was by far the most important thing to me. So it's almost like the transition there has been seamless and easy because I'm working with a really gifted student here. I'm working with a student that has a huge, deep priority of their classroom experience. That's very important to all the ladies that I'm coaching. And so that just fits so well with my own philosophy about why you're here in the first place. You are here to study and to get a degree and to prepare for a vocation in life after college. And so the student-friendly focus, I think, is big. One that I have loved is because they're not being compensated financially to play their sport. It has been very refreshing to know that pretty much anybody on my team wants to be there. They're not there because, hey, this makes things a little bit less expensive for my family, or I really like the gear, or, it's like they want to play because it just was surreal. I think the first time I got a commitment from a recruit to be like, you're playing soccer because you want to play collegiately, and you're signing up, at a place like here where we play a very highly competitive schedule. We'll do some decent amount of traveling. We expect a good commitment from them. It's like you're signing up to do a lot, and you're not being technically compensated for it. And so that that is wonderful to just see a young person who's that committed to wanting to do it, and doing it, I think, with pure motives. And I've really enjoyed that. The limited calendar with our players, that would be my answer about the negative. But I think people's mind would naturally go to X's and O's time. And I think hopefully even with some of the other questions that I've already answered, the limited calendar here is hard for me because of the desire I have to really create a unique and special community. And sometimes the boundaries and the rules, I'm just like, I just want to sit down and study a book with my team. It's like, I'm not trying to, take them out on the practice field for hours that go outside the bounds of what we're supposed to do. I just want to, and I'm learning those new rules every day. Sometimes even like what we're able to provide to an incoming student athlete until they're actually here on campus. We can only do certain things. There's things that aren't allowed. And it's like, all I'm thinking, Phil and Paul, is just how do I integrate? I mean, this year I have 14 new players.
Wow.
After my first season, we had 11 seniors. I had 11 returning players. So last winter I had 11 players in the program. So I have 14 new players. Well, my heart all spring and summer was, how do I integrate these two groups and begin to grow community? There were some boundaries just by NCAA D3 compliance that get in the way of doing that. And so my heart wasn't to get time on the field with them. My heart was like, I just want to grow community and culture in our program. And at the NAI level, or maybe I'm not as familiar with D1 and D2, my guess is I would have that space to do it. And at D3, it's a little harder.
Yeah, the time restriction. I mean, if you talk to any coach at any level, the time restrictions on players is something I hear time and time again for different reasons, and competitive advantages and this and that, development of players. But what I don't hear enough is, I just want to be able to pour more into my players. So it's refreshing to hear that. And I know that at every level there's different restrictions and things that coaches have with their players. But I think to the true nature of us as coaches, that should be, our biggest thing. And of course, as coaches, one of the best ways you can really bond with a player that's a soccer player is sometimes on the pitch, too. So there's a trust that can be, I don't want to say earned, but trust that can be developed through those times as well. But I actually love hearing that. It's refreshing, that motivation behind it. And through that conversation, you kind of answered this question, but what is it about Wheaton that makes them different, or makes your program different? You've kind of mentioned a little bit, but go in a little bit more depth of like, what is it that makes Wheaton different than other programs? What makes them stand out?
Yeah. I think this is obviously anybody who's kind of been in the college soccer world and the smaller college soccer world would know that this has been a program that over the years has had quite a bit of success. 3 NCAA titles. They were in the early 2000s, so it's been a little while. But at the same time, you have that rich legacy, and one coach, Pete Felsky, for 34 years, mm-hmm. and so one coach for an entire history of a program. And obviously just loads of success in his time here. And so, and since being here, I have recognized that Wheaton is very committed to having strong athletic teams, like that, from facilities to allowing us to recruit and do the things we need to do, to the budgeting, things like that. Like, I'm just very impressed that, hey, there's a commitment to, we want our student athletes to have a quality experience and be competitive on the field. So there's one prong. Number two, the academic rigor. Just one of the best academic institutions, small liberal arts schools in the country. And when I first got here, I sat with every player for an hour, and, you're with 20, or I think there were 18 when I got here. And I sat with all of them for at least an hour. And, I've even told them this. I said, I'm not stereotyping your generation, but I'm like, I thought I would hear somebody complain about their classroom experience. And they rave about the faculty, and they just can't say enough good things. I just had a player in here a few minutes ago before we started, and she's talking about this professor she has for Old Testament, and she's just like, she just couldn't stop talking about the class. So the academic rigor, the challenge of it, our players say, like, this place busts their chops. I mean, it's hard. And the academic rigor, and then the spiritual legacy. It's not about names, but, you know, when you are at an institution where Billy Graham attended, and John Piper and Jim Elliott, and, you know, some legends of the faith, not to mention countless, probably hundreds and thousands of other people that are serving Christ in his kingdom all over the country and world. I mean, I've heard alumni say it in my short time here, like, when you can put those three prongs together, and you are a talented student athlete who really wants a high quality classroom experience, wants to compete on the field, but deeply loves Jesus and wants that to be part of their experience, Wheaton checks all those boxes.
Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity for you to be able to go and sit down with a family and say, hey, we're going to compete at the highest level academically. You're going to get a great education, right? We compete at the highest level, you know, athletically, and at the same time, we're doing it as a faith-based institution. So the core of who we are shines through in everything that we're doing. It's just I'm sure it's one of those things where you get kids on campus, you're probably getting a commitment, I would say.
It's so funny. It's so funny, Paul, you say that, because, like, you know, when you're new, right? I'm sure it was that way at Trinity. You know, you hear from people who have been here a while, and I'm like, I looked around. I'm looking out my window right now. I'm like, I can recruit to this place. You know, I mean, there are just so many amazing things about it that, yeah, and there are challenges, just like there would be at any place to recruit to. And but one of the first things that I thought about were some of what you shared. You know, when rarely does a student come on campus and not say, wow, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, it feels collegial, it feels bigger than a 2,500 student school, and yet I'm known and people care about me, and I'm being pushed and challenged in the classroom. And like you said, it's all under the umbrella of for Christ and his kingdom, which is just outstanding.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit too. I mean, Marcy and I are extremely passionate about merging faith and sport, and something that, you know, we're doing through our Warrior Way soccer program. Like, how do you incorporate your faith through your coaching?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, and what I'll do is I'll give an answer that I generally give, and if you guys think, hey, let's dive into that more specifically and deeply, because I think for a long time I would have answered with various, like, components of our program, things that we do, and I think that might be valuable even for this kind of arena, a podcast interview like this. So if it is, I can go there in a second. I think what I have in the last few years kind of come across is, like, I think it's important for me to, at the core, be a deeply devoted follower of Jesus. I mean, just the disciplines of, you know, scripture has been a passion for me for about 15 years now. About 15 years ago, I was like, it has to become a core discipline, to where even if it's not always in memorization and things like that, it's just like the hunger for the word and all that it brings to my life is got to be something that's there. If you're going to be leading 25 to 30 college age students through 4 of the most important years of their life, you have to be grounded in that way. And so, but about 2 years ago, I came across, right before actually the move here, ironically, I was like, man, my prayer life is just, it's not where it needs to be. And prayer is another discipline. And so I think my answer would be, the way that I most readily incorporate faith into what I do as a coach here is to invest heavily in my own personal relationship with Jesus, just that I am deeply committed to him and following him. And then what happens is, and again, happy to go into other side, like actual practical areas, but what happens then is when the player who's struggling with playing time walks in my office, that conversation has been covered in prayer. That conversation has, it's seasoned with the way Jesus would handle a conversation like that. And I think an assistant coach of mine a few years ago, when I was at Trinity. He was my assistant coach for over 20 years. And then he and his wife took a job at another college. And so many nights driving places to recruit and just back from games. And he was like, "What do you want for our program the most?" And I said, "I want depth and intentionality." I said, "I don't want a shallow college soccer program." And I don't know if I've ever been able to define that fully, but I'm like, I want kids to finish playing and be like, they talk about the on field, and before they can kind of finish talking about their on field experience, they start talking about, well, my coach cared about me as a person and he invested in me holistically. And before they finish there, they're like, but I had teammates and coaching staff that were discipling me, and I actually grew in my faith in my time there. And my soccer IQ grew. And they can't finish one story because the program had a holistic impact on their life. And I think that starts with me making sure that I am really richly and deeply walking with the Lord, and then that there is a depth and intentionality. We had a new freshman in yesterday. I was talking to her, and she's like, "I'm just kind of blown away because it seems like everything is really intentional here. Like you're trying there's a purpose behind everything we do." And so that would be my 20,000 feet in the air answer, I guess. Practically, we have discipleship small groups. I did not want those to be time for players sitting around just shooting the breeze. That can generally kind of turn into like really bad things. And so in my 2 years here, last year I handled it. I now have a grad assistant who's passionate about discipleship handling it. We wrote curriculum. So they are in the Word together, but it's not this rigid Bible study. They're reading scripture together. They're processing it together, but then they're also talking about, well, how does this apply to my life? How does this apply to, my life as a Wheaton student athlete? How does it apply to our team right now? And so that would be one way. But just I think that idea that I am a Christian man who happens to coach a college soccer team, and so really, really just focusing so intently on being a Christian man who's very dedicated to his Savior and to his God. And then in that, it just becomes an outflowing of what I do, how I handle the conversation about playing time, how I handle the day that I come to practice and we look like we're dead. We don't look like we even want to be there. We look apathetic. Well, there's lots of ways. You guys know this. You're good coaches. You guys know there's lots of ways to handle an apathetic team. But I think there's probably a way to handle it that could teach a spiritual and a life lesson that's way different than get on the line because you're just really upsetting me today. And you're not doing what I want you to do. So I apologize if that's not the direction, because it's not super this is what we do every day. And we have small groups and we do this. But like for me, it's depth and intentionality and making sure I'm where I need to be. And then it's just flowing out of everything I do. I mean, every conversation, a halftime talk is seasoned with how God would want me to handle that.
Yeah, I think what's important there is, for our coaches that listen to this podcast, is that you've got to remember you can't give something you don't have, right? So as you're saying, you're filling yourself with the Word, and you're being disciplined, and you're gaining depth and intentionality in your own relationship with Christ, and you can't give that to others if you don't have it. And I think it's a great lesson for our coaches that are on here that crave that or trying to figure out how to do that. You can't implement it if you don't have it yourself. So I think it's a great lesson for our coaches. And I think we miss intentionality a lot. And I would say you probably, I don't know this, I'm speaking probably out of turn, but sometimes you may walk away feeling like you've missed an opportunity to get better from a soccer perspective because the God perspective took precedent. And your soccer coach, part of you is like, oh man, did I miss an opportunity for us? But at the end of the day, you can sit back and rest on the fact that if God took control of that, your team got better. And so I love the perspective. Phil, I'd love to hear your insight on that too.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's nothing to apologize for there, man. That was awesome. That was a fantastic reminder, like you said, Paul. Just it's so crazy. You got to start with self leadership. You got to start with that your relationship with the Lord. If you can't give that, you can't lead in incorporate faith into coaching if you're not solid in it, right? It's like going back to Timothy and Titus talking about the deacons and elders. It's like you got to make sure your house is in order first. If your house isn't in order, you can't give to others. And so that's something I absolutely love. That one thing I would like to hear is, because I know that there's so many coaches that struggle when there's conflict within the team. Either you have, you kind of talk about the peacemaking continuum. There's peace faking and there's peace breaking, and certain personality styles are more prone to do breaking, and certain personality styles are prone to do faking. And oftentimes in Christian teams in particular, that peace faking is that, like, we have a nice problem on our teams where everyone just doesn't want to engage it because, well, that's not the Christian thing to do. We got to just pretend that everything's okay. How do you engage that and engage that healthy conflict within the team to encourage that, to say, look, the only way we're going to be the best we can be, not just as a team, but as humans, is if we engage conflict well and in a proper way? How are you able to engage that with your team?
So, and I feel like I can be transparent about this, like respectful of my team. It's unique. Like if I'm doing this interview year 26 at Trinity, I'm opening the coffers. It's like, here's all of our stuff, right? Because it's like, I've been here longer than any of you players. So, whereas here, I still kind of feel like there's players playing for me this season that have been here longer at Wheaton than me, and so, but I think they'd be totally cool with me sharing this. So when I got here, I think one of the things I remember in those first interviews, I heard from a player, I heard this from several players. I said, tell me about your soccer experience here at Wheaton. And one girl said, I like my teammates. I don't know my teammates very well. And that was a super revealing comment to me. And I heard, whether said exactly that way, I heard it said several times. And so one of the things I went after pretty quickly was like this idea of like, we have to be willing to be transparent and vulnerable. And we have to be willing to have conversations that are right there. I think you may have said it, Phil, and I say it all the time, but like difficult conversations. I had a mentor say, if you just change that to crucial conversations, it totally changes our attitude about it. It's like that conversation you were describing, conflict within the team or within a group of players or two players or player and coach. Those are crucial conversations. And if we say crucial, we don't run from it. We actually kind of run towards it because we're like, this is for the good of the team. This is going to make us a better unit. This is going to make us a better testimony, right? I think part of how we handle difficult conversations in a Christian environment is really vital because we can look a lot like the world many times, and from gossip to slander to different things and routes we take to bitterness and lack of forgiveness. And these are all things that Scripture clearly says we shouldn't be, yet we can take conflict many times and look very much like the world. And so, so the story, what I would say, Phil, the number one answer I give is that training. We read a book together last spring as a team that dove pretty heavily into this and loved this moment. So I only had 11 returners. So our leadership meetings in the spring were, in some ways, they were really cool because they were kind of quaint and small, right? Like, you'd be like, oh, you broke your team up into groups. No, that was my entire team last spring. And so we sat in a room and went through this book, and a couple of the chapters were about your very question. And being still somewhat new, I remember I said, let's just be honest. How do you guys handle moments like that? And I had watched them. I had been with them by this point just over a year, and I had been through a competitive season with them, and a season where at one point we were down to 14 field players, because of injuries, and they dealt with a lot of adversity. And so I said, how do you handle situations like that? I said, how do you guys think you do with them? And one of the rising seniors, she's one of our captains now, she raises her hand. She goes, I just think we don't have those conversations. She's like, she was just blunt. I said, how do you do with those conversations? And she goes, well, in my time, we just basically don't have them. And loved her honesty. And it lightened the room. And then we dove heavily into why it's important and how do we deal with it. And I think my second part of my answer, Phil, would be, if love, discipleship, multiplication is my purpose, where I hang the really tough conversation with a girl is I hang it on the love like hook. I say, that's me loving you. I love you enough to say, hey, I think you should hear this. And I want our relationship to be based in those types of things, love and discipleship, that we can hear hard things from each other because they're actually sharpening us and making us better. And that goes the other way too. I, as your coach, I mean, you guys both have coached. You can be at a place 30 years and you make mistakes. When you're in a place in your first year, I never felt more 22 years old than I did a year ago. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like my first high school season all over again, except I'm at Wheaton College and they're expecting a lot more out of me, and I'm like the 22-year-old high school coach all over again, who's screwing things up every day. And I need to be okay with my players having those conversations and saying, hey, maybe we should try this, and that's not working. And but yeah, a lot there I kind of spewed, but I loved when she just raised her hand and she's like, yeah, in the past, we just haven't had those conversations. And so it allowed us to really, have a light moment, but say, okay, how do we put an end to that? Because we're going to be a healthier team if we're willing to have those.
Yeah. And I've worked with a lot of schools, and that's not rare. That's the rule at most places, which is why if we can come in as coaches and be able to, as you said, disciple, love them in our conversations with them, disciple them to have those conversations with each other. What a massive thing to be able to engage in the world and in marriages and parenting.
Right.
Like, this is so important. And, and that's what, as a coach, I'm like, if I can help a little bit in those things, it hopefully, I wish I would have known this stuff when I was their age.
Yep.
And so that's kind of a lot of what I go do is what would I wanted to know like back then? What would help me and help me avoid some of the problems I had, and I probably tend toward the peace breaking side. And just engage it. We just got to engage it, and my wife's on the opposite. And I learned very quickly that doesn't work if you don't meet people where they are. And so that's the flip side is, well, we have them and it's just war all the time. Well, that's not good either, right? So how do we engage these things in ways that are reconciliatory?
Yeah. When we were having the conversation, the book we were in talked about, and that you just made me really think of this. So once that we kind of had that moment and then dove more heavily into that chapter and this topic, the book focused heavily on the idea that if it's the three of us, Paul has one style of dealing with conflict, and Phil has one, and Patrick has one, and we can just assume that everybody has the same one as us, and that just creates more conflict. And then one of the things it talked about was that a lot of people in moments like you're describing, Phil, they put pillows around everything. That's the key maker, right? Like, how many pillows I'm going to tell you something I think you should know, and I should probably hold you accountable, but I'm going to put 100 pillows around it. And by the time I actually give the message, I've softened it so much that it really hasn't, it hasn't sent the message that it needed to send. And so it was neat because we have some ladies on our team that they're big pillow people. They're like, hey, I want to make this as painless as possible, but I actually do need to probably call you out on something, but I'm going to make it as painless as possible. And we talked about how that doesn't really get us anywhere. We're just spinning our wheels when we do that.
Yeah.
No, I like that. There's a lot there. And I think there's a whole podcast. We sit and talk about that. And later when we talk about books, you got to tell us the name of that book. You keep referring to this book and you won't tell us the name of it.
Yeah,
so let's hold it
it's
to
the
the
teaser.
end. Let's hold it to the end. Let people hold on for that.
Okay.
because you're making us hold on. This great book. It was awesome for our team. It was
Best
awesome.
book ever.
Not going to tell you the name. Not going to tell you the name. So if you don't know the name, if you can't remember it, Patrick, I'm giving you a couple minutes to find it,
That's
so you
right.
can tell us at the end. Okay. All right. Because that's how I am. I'm like,
I
I got
remember
this
the
great
name.
book. I don't know the name of it.
Don't say it yet.
But
Don't
now I'm
say it
looking
yet.
for the author.
Oh,
you
we get
hold
the
it.
author. Don't worry about it. I'll figure out the author if you got the name. But hold on to it. That's funny.
Patrick, I love what you're doing, with this program and what you do and who you are as a coach and what you're doing for your players. I think obviously you've talked a little bit about your time as a player, in college and the effect that maybe some coaches or that coach had on you. I hate to say, like, tell us who your best coach was, but tell us, like, who was let's just say it. Who was the best coach you had? Why was he or she the best coach? What did you learn from that person, and how has that affected you or shaped you and framed you into the coach you are today?
Yeah. I would say it was my coach at Judson, Steve Burke. He I think it was the first picture I had of that both and program. I had never played in a program that had a spiritual component till I went there. And I had played in plenty of programs where there might be drama and conflict that went unresolved. And I played in programs that were good. And I played on teams that, hey, we probably could have had more discipline and more teaching and more player development. And it was the first time I had a picture of both, and it was like compelling. It like made me, it's what gave me the vision, honestly, of like, I think I would like to do this as my life work. I mean, if it had just been, I want to stay in soccer, well, there's lots of other ways to stay in soccer, from, just as a soccer parent to so many other countless ways in business and things like that. And, but for me, the actual idea of like, I think I want to do this. I want to coach, and I want to coach with a vision of having a program that has a purpose and an objective. And the purpose is bigger than soccer, and the objective is soccer related. And it's highly soccer focused, because I'm not the Wheaton band director. I'm not leading a theater group. I'm a college soccer coach. And so the soccer should be taken extremely seriously, but the purpose is bigger than that. That was the first time I had ever seen anything like that. And then I had shared this earlier, that my eternity was changed in that program. I mean, you can go to a Christian college and find all the wrong influences. And I was doing it for my first year and a half at Judson. I guess it's okay to say now on a podcast, but I probably should have been kicked out of Judson many times in my first year and a half, if the rules were the rules and I wasn't following them, and was finding the wrong influences even in a place like that. And it's just amazing that so many of my college teammates in my time there, and countless other young men who played in that program, are now walking with Jesus. And I think Steve Burke and that program was a big piece of shaping that. I thought about evangelism and discipleship. Like, that program had an evangelism component too. I would say I've had to do like look in the mirror and who am I as a coach? And I probably fall more heavily on the discipleship component of coaching in a Christian environment, a Christian specific environment. But if there hadn't been an evangelism, I'm not sure, where would I be today? What would I be doing? Who would I be married to? How would I have raised my kids? That Steve and that program at Judson just gave me a compelling picture of, man, college sports can be so much bigger than 80 games in a 4-year career, right? It can be a 50-year impact on your life. I mean, I will carry things from my Judson soccer experience with me to the day I leave this earth. And ultimately, I'm probably imparting some of those very things into players that I coach. So I would say it'd have to be there, just because of the vision it kind of cast for me and where it propelled me post college, and what it led me to do.
Yeah, and I think a great lesson to our coaches again listening. Like, don't underestimate the impact that you may not even know that you're having on your players. And sometimes as coaches, we feel the resistance because we've all coached the players that seem to just don't get it at first, right? They're getting in trouble, or they don't get the academic piece, or maybe they're having problems at home. And as a coach, you feel that resistance. But as coaches, I think the message there is like, you got to persevere through that, and you got to push through for those student athletes, right? And just don't underplay the impact that you may not even know that you're having on your players.
Yep. Well said.
Yeah, and you touched on some of these things earlier on when you were kind of going through your story, but what is one, if you had one defining moment, maybe you have a couple, but what is one defining moment in your soccer career as a player? Why was it so impactful? What did you learn from it? How are you using it today?
Yeah. I'm smiling and laughing because like people ask you that question, and then what do you say? Oh, I've got two. So you asked for one, I'm going to give you two.
If you got two, you can do two, but that's fine.
Well, I think they relate.
Totally over delivering today, man. Yes. I love it. Just over delivering.
Just do one two that are related, and then we can make it into one.
That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do.
All right.
We know the tricks of the trade. So I would say my sophomore year when I accepted Christ. Because, well, I'll kind of at the end say why the two relate to this and what they've taught me, I think, and what I use now as a coach. So up until that point, I was very much a victim of how I played. If I played well, I was on top of the world. If I had a poor match, my self-worth and my kind of opinion of myself and just my mood, everything was affected by that. Every piece of my core identity was driven by how I played on the field. And so when I accepted Christ, that didn't get solved immediately, and it never really gets solved. I'm about to play my first match on Friday, and I'm sure I will wrestle with identity over the next 3 months, for sure. But for the first time ever, when you recognize that, hey, I'm a child of God who's loved unconditionally by him, and he's cared enough to send his son to die for me, and that promise is eternal life, it changes like how you view a soccer match, and do I find all my worth through that? So that would be, I think that has to be there. The second one would be when I tore my ACL my senior year, because it was a career-ending injury. And it, when it happens, you're like, this is it. The timetable doesn't work. I'm done. But I'm trying to do the math. I was just under 2 years into my Christian walk. So it was the first really hard thing that I had to go through as a follower of Christ, because I would never, it's not prosperity theology, but honestly, when I got saved and soccer began to take its proper place in my priorities, my playing actually got better, and my minutes went up, and my contributions to the team my junior and senior year were much greater than my first couple years. And so it was kind of like, right, an infant Christian, I'm like, hey, I accepted Jesus, and look at my life since then, it's just skyrocketing. And then you have this injury, and it was the best team we had ever had in the history of the school. I had won my spot back. I was playing, we were doing well. And it's done. It's over. You're on the sideline, you're chasing balls at practice, and on crutches, and knowing you're facing surgery, and all of that. So it was the first time my faith was tested. And I think the two overarching lessons that I bring to my coaching from those moments, the identity piece. Boy, kids today wrestle with their identity in the wrong place so much. Yep. And it's probably the biggest thing that I face as a coach and mentor and leader is just helping them try to get a grasp on, like, this is where your identity should really be grounded. And so having wrestled with that pre-salvation, having wrestled with that when it was like, I can't play anymore. What do I matter to this team? That's been helpful. And then the injury component, I coach on the women's side primarily, now obviously, and for most of my career I had 14 incoming players, guys. I had 3 ACL tears in the class before they got here.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. So I have 3 freshmen who aren't playing right now. One she's getting close to returning because she tore it last November. But the other 2, it was this spring and summer, so they're not even going to play this year. And one has been very open and honest. It's just like, very talented player, and she's like, I've never been injured before, and it's playing havoc with my mind. And so to have walked the road of an ACL tear and recovery and surgery and just being injured, having your career ended on an injury, that's been helpful. I think it helps when you sit down with a kid who's just gotten the MRI results to be able to say, hey, I've done this.
Yeah, those are great. And you mentioned at the very beginning too, and you kind of finished with it there, is that, the experiences that you have earlier in life. In hindsight, now you look back at it, maybe in the moment you're like, why in the world, and now you can look back and say, okay, if not for any other reason, right now I can take those experiences and really be a better coach for my players in this moment. And I think it's a really, really, really special thing to be able to take into that, if that is a perspective that you have. So appreciate that.
It builds your faith too, because
yeah,
you sit as a follower of Christ and you go, oh, okay. I'm reading a lot of Esther right now, and it's like, when I'm reading it, that's the thing that I'm kind of coming across, is like all these events, right? The big thing you hear all the time about that book is God's name is never mentioned. Not once in the book, but he's all over the book, And so it's like, when you're a senior and you tear your ACL and you're having your team's having the best season it's had in the history of the school, and you're like, I'm not a part of it. You're like, what in the world, God? I mean, this is what a loving God does. And then you sit 25, 30 years later, and you're like, I had a mom of one of our ACL girls just say, like, your reaction when she called you was so helpful for her, and I wasn't doing anything but just being like, hey, I've been there before. I wasn't doing anything special. I was just saying, hey, I've been there before. So that's such a faith builder, Paul, for me. Like, when I can look back and say, yeah, God, you were pulling all the strings, there's no coincidences.
Yeah, definitely. And what a special thing. And that player's calling you thinking, coach is going to cut me. Not interested in me anymore. I'm no longer useful to the program. And then as soon as probably built up minutes and hours of like the courage to call you, and then instantly it's like, hey, I'm here for you. Whatever you need, I've been there. And what a great relief for those folks. So as my good friend Phil Dark always says, every good thing must come to an end. And we're running down to the bottom of this program. And we always finish with a couple of questions that are the same throughout the program. So we're going to hit you with those as well. And excited that towards the end we're going to hear the name of this book, hopefully. But before we get to that, Patrick, how are the lessons? You talked a lot about the lessons you've learned through soccer back into soccer, but how have you used the lessons you've learned directly from the game of soccer? How have you used those lessons in your marriage and parenting?
Yeah, I think that I think the number one way that I do that, I'm fascinated by teams. I hadn't said that yet. I usually in this kind of context would say that. Like, I love teams. I think I would struggle to coach an individual sport, or I just love the idea of all these people coming from wide variety of backgrounds, and different coaches, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different diversity of culture and race, and then you come together and it's like, oh yeah, we have an opponent trying to keep us from doing something, and we got to try to rally together and accomplish a goal. Teams fascinate me, and healthy teams, dysfunctional teams, all of it fascinates me. Well, our families are teams, and so right away, so many of the concepts so I would say my first answer is sometimes it's convicting. I'm like, things I'm preaching to my players, I'm like, am I doing that for my wife? Am I doing that for my son and my daughter? So sometimes there's just conviction, because it's like, you've got a great message in the locker room on Thursday, but how are you living that out later, Friday and Saturday, with your number one team, right? Your number one team should be your spouse and your children. The second piece relates to teams, is my I have two, I guess one now would probably not even be young adult. I have a, 23, 28-year-old, and they're both out there. They don't live at home anymore. They're in the professional world. They're working in their degrees and that they got in college, but they're members of teams. Both just went through a recent job change. Neither performed badly, but both their businesses downsized and they had to find new jobs. And so, they talking to them about resiliency, perseverance, faith, as they were evaluating different opportunities. Well, think about the people you're going to work with. Think about the fit for you and your, so I got to use so many of the things we talk about in a team context and how teams work, like in a soccer arena. We could apply that to their lives, as they were seeking new career fields and their relationships. Neither one of them is married yet, so they're obviously dating, and they have friendships and relationships and various things I would use as a coach. I'm coaching college students and I'm dealing with young adults, so a lot of that stuff just carries over very well there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with that convicting part, I think is huge to just from the standpoint of, am I just being a coach or am I a player as well? And am I playing it well? And oftentimes I will say I'm a much better coach than a player. That's okay if it means playing striker, but it better not be okay if it means being a husband or being a father or being a coach for that matter.
Right.
I better not coach coaches better than I coach my players. About what to do if we're not acting it out. And it goes back to what you talked about earlier. If you're not pouring into self, being in the Word, praying, just being disciplined yourself, then it's not going to outpour. It's not going to flow out of you naturally. So,
Right.
All right. Now we have pumped this up so much for this last question. I feel like it's going to be really, really hard, but I have no doubt you're going to meet the expectation and beat it. I have no doubt. So what have you watched, read, or listened to? And I hope it's not just this one, but I hope there's some other goodness coming out of Patrick here in a minute. But what have you watched, read, or listened to that has most impacted your thinking on how soccer explains life and leadership?
Yeah, this would be a book I would not have even thinking about this question. I would not have even put this on my list. The book is called High Impact Teams, and again, the author escapes me right now. It was recommended. I heard on a podcast. I heard the Liberty lacrosse coach talk about it, and he actually hadn't dove into it yet. But I just jotted it down because always looking for a new book. And what I would say is the gem of it, and I have a couple others that I think are really good too. And what I think is the genius of this book, it is a book written from, I guess, lack of a better term, a Christian perspective. But I loved the idea. It just didn't feel kind of like mushy and soft, like to me. Like I now sound like I've stereotyped Christian books that way. I didn't mean to. It was like, one of the first chapters says a really healthy team is deeply invested in relationships, but it's also very concerned with results. And that's easy with us to go winning, but it was like, the author was like, you need to be productive in whatever you are. If you're a business, if you're a college soccer team, if you're the band, if you're a theater group, you're equally concerned with relationships and results. And I felt like it did such a good job of, like, I never felt like it drifted too far to one. Like all of a sudden you're reading and you're 10 chapters in and you're like, oh, it's kind of heavy on the relationship stuff. And it's like, well, if you don't get it done in the arena you're in, oh, well, you've got good relationships. Like it was a both and book, right? Like it was like the perfect both and book. And then when it talked about results, this is the other piece of it I would highly recommend to people. Team books many times focus on team, and then people can sit in a room and discuss it and go, yeah, that chapter was great. Phil really needed to hear that. And I'm so glad the coach covered that chapter because Paul is like terrible at that. This book did anything that was about like the relational component went very heavily on look in the mirror first. And until you read it, you have to read it to kind of, I'm not describing it well, but I just was amazed. It was always like, I found the players having to look at themselves first and go, well, how I handle this aspect of the relational part of our team, how am I impacting that for others instead of how are Phil and Paul impacting that for me? Like
Yeah.
the book had some crazy way of doing that. It just made them look in the mirror a lot versus point fingers. And then it did relationships and results, which I think most books kind of drift to one side or the other with that. It's all about results or it's all about relationships and it's fluffy on the results. And so, and the author even says at the beginning, this book is not meant to be read by a person. It's meant to be discussed in groups. And I found it was very productive for doing that. So.
And our producer, which is my phone, it just informed me that Lance Witt is the author of that book.
That's
and
correct.
A couple wrote the foreword as well, it looked like. But what, I speed round. What are the books that you would have thought about other than high impact teams?
The Christian Athlete by Brian Smith. I feel like it's as close to kind of like a theology of sport as anything I've seen in a while. Like he dives heavily into the idea of what we're really after as a Christian athlete is contentment. We want to be content in our sport. We want to play free. Like you'll hear that phrase a lot. He deals heavily with the identity, and there's some amazing chapters on injury in there. So the Christian Athlete would be one. The best leadership book I've read. I still say this. Bought it for my captains. My first 2 sets of captains here at Wheaton. Is called Leadership as an Identity by Crawford Loritz. It's a book that many times you'll say that and people are like, I've never seen that book. And here's why I love it. When I was at Trinity, he would teach a 1-week class at the seminary on leadership. And I would hear about this and they would always say, like, if you don't get online and register in 2 minutes, it's full. And he would always be there every spring. He would preach in chapel, and he's a pretty well-known pastor. He had done a lot with Promise Keepers over the years, and so this book is actually all his notes from that class. It's basically his class in book form. And he says there are 4 components. So he says, first of all, Christian leadership is at the intersection of a person, God, and like a problem or something to solve. Like there's a reason, there's a rationale, a very available person, and a God and creator. And the intersection of those 3 is where Christian leadership really takes place. And but he says there are 4 distinctive things about a Christian leader. And here's why I love the book. This is probably why a lot of people don't know about it. He says, number 1, first and foremost, the best leaders are broken. And that just doesn't sell on New York Times seller leadership lists, right? It's, I want to be broken. And then he says, uncommon communion with God, servant leadership, and radical immediate obedience. And the coolest part of the book is he says those 4 things and he never really spells it out for you. But if you stop and think, brokenness, uncommon communion with the Father, servant leadership, and radical immediate obedience, it's Jesus. It's all 4 things, right? That's what Jesus did. And so he's basically taking you through a leadership model that is how Jesus led. And then the Coach's Guide to Teaching, if we just wanted to get into like training environment, like that book is, Phil, I think you've heard me talk about it a little bit. I can't tell if it's Doug Lemov or Lemov, Lemov, but unbelievable book. And he writes it. He had written a book for teachers that Marcus Wood recommended to me, and just about like how people retain information and how long-term memory actually. And it was a book written for teachers, and Marcus is like, I've gotten a ton of traction out of it because coaching is teaching. Well, then Doug Lemov wrote a book actually for coaches. And then the best part is Doug's world is soccer. So all the examples in the book are from like the Atlanta United Academy coaches and from MLS coaches and coach. So every example, instead of like even translating it from basketball or football, they're all soccer examples.
Yeah.
But this book made me revisit I have never read a book that more often he's like, somebody says, don't do this. And I'm like, oh, I do that all the time. And it was just like, my players would tell you, like my training sessions and how I approach training totally changed since reading that book. So that's not so much about maybe leadership, but it's had a big impact on me because I think it's changed how I've approached training sessions and such.
Yeah, it is about leadership for sure. And I asked you, I wanted to make sure to ask because I know you're a reader, and you're pumping the boys in the boat summer reading for the United Soccer Coaches group we're in. Like that, I love that because leaders are learners. Leaders are readers is what we used to say, but I think there's so many different ways to learn nowadays.
Right.
If you're not continually pouring into yourself as far as that goes, and I think starting with Scripture, we're gonna go stale. We're gonna go stagnant, and that's something that, as you said, you're learning after doing this for however long. By the way, I'm just gonna say this because I'm sure Paul's thinking it. Like, you're talking about your kids being 28, 23. You're talking about coaching for decades, and I'm like, you still look. You don't look a day over 45. I mean, that's what I'm saying here. So, and I know you got to be older than that, or else you started way too early. But yeah, I just had to say that. Since it's audio for the most part, people, Patrick's, looking good for however old you are. So just I couldn't. I had to say it. I had to, just throw it out there. But thank you so much.
We're all thinking it. We're all
exactly. I mean, I just had to put out. We got to be vulnerable here. So
anyway, shirt is in the mail.
Yeah. So anyway, hey, appreciate your friendship, and I just get excited that we get to share this with others. So thank you so much for being a part of the show.
You bet. Thank you guys for having me. I love what you do and love listening to your podcast. So.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, hey, thank you for being a part of this show. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for taking what you're learning. And I there's so much good stuff in this episode. I just hope that you take it and you really engage with it, put it into action. These books, I mean, that's like a couple months of reading, engaging in depth, of really being able to learn. So I hope you take it all and you use it. Check out Warrior Way. Soccer.com see what Paul and Marcy are doing, coaching the bigger game. If you want to find out what I'm doing, you can go check that out. I just hope that you're taking all that you're learning from this show and you use it to be a better, coach, better player, better spouse, better parent, better leader, better in all that you do. And you continually remind yourself that soccer does explain life and leadership. Thanks a lot. Have a great couple weeks.